Okay, we are sitting down here to go through the Celophane sculpting casting method. Now, this is really different from the alginate type method and also the drawing method that we're also going to show you in these videos. This is a method that's pretty new to me, so you will see me making some serious rookie mistakes here. But many of your other professors will have done this and have got results and do projects with this technique in their classes that sound really interesting. Now, I'm learning to really love this technique because for less than one roll of cellophane and some packing tape, I was able to capture the form of my arm and hand. Now, what does it take to do a whole body? Just one roll, or do you need 2 rolls? I bought 3 just in case. And you can get that general form and get the impression of a shape of, and it's enough. And I feel like, as you'll see as this carries on, it has an aesthetic that's like sort of ghostly and a bit spooky and a bit like it's not the detail isn't there, and so the audience is left to sort of fill in the blanks and feel the implied form or details that are left out. And I think that's what I'm really enjoying about this technique, and we'll see the arm that we come up with at the end. And I'll also, as we go on, I'll talk about ways in which, if you don't particularly like this aesthetic, how to use this as a framework, a base to build off of later on, but you've already got that groundwork done. And I think that's how we're thinking that you will probably use most of our techniques here that we're teaching. We're showing you the baseline, that how with the alginate, how to capture the detail, with the light and shadow sketching technique, how to just give yourself a really rough hint of how to start, but help you capture a form through your own hand. And with this one, you're making a reference to the body through its actual physical encapsulation, but also you have a lot of leeway to spring off of. One thing that I think is really nice about this technique that many other sculpture techniques it's actually quite hard to do is these materials are lightweight. So often if we're working with clay or plaster or wood or another type of material, things get heavy. And what happens when things get heavy is, especially if you have extraneous extruding limbs on a piece, or dangling tentacles, or things that come out and need to hang out a long way, problems start to exponentially get exacerbated by the fact that you want a dangling limb off your sculpture. Now with this technique, because things are so light, they hold themselves. It's lightweight. It's like a strange exoskeleton, that's hollow. Now, you probably want a little bit of framework if you were going for something larger, like a more of a whole figure kind of character. But for what we're working with to here now, don't forget the prompt does have a bit of a size restriction because of how many people we're looking to get in this exhibition. But it's pretty exciting technique, and that's what I'm looking for. So here what you can see is I am just making a rough framework. I'm looking to capture my arm at a sort of bent, not 90-degree angle, but slightly bent angle. And later on we'll see I want to capture my hand in a slightly sort of clenched claw, open claw fist shape, for a little bit of sort of tension in the hand. Now, I'm working here just by myself, and I would thoroughly recommend that in your classes you work in pairs. you want someone else doing this. You either want someone to be your model so that you can pose them and then get them to hold still exactly where you need them to, or you can strike the pose you want and try to get someone else to do the wrapping for you. You know, work in pairs, teams, and things will go much simpler. Now, but I'm showing it to you like this because it is possible to do this by yourself. I can move my arm a certain amount and then have it and not capture the form quite as I want it, because I have to move my arm to do some of the actions like cutting or getting bits of tape off the roll or whatever. And then I can bend my arm still and then put a bit more tape or cellophane around and lock it in, kind of thing, and fine tune my pose as I go along. And so it's really forgiving in those terms, which is actually something that's quite unusual for casting mold making techniques. Here I go down a bit of a fool's errand. I am trying to capture the whole arm and also the hand at the same time. Now, this really demonstrates sort of the limits of especially doing it on your own. I think if you had a partner, you might be able to do this. However, I switch techniques and don't try to do the hand in one, and I'll show you how that works later on, because that's the technique I end up going with. I was hopeful I could capture it all in one go, but I think capturing each sort of body part in finite is probably the way to go. It's actually really easy to attach other parts, and that doesn't disrupt the form, you know, whereas like a more rigid casting technique, like if you're casting in plaster, you'd have to do quite a bit of sanding and refining it to get the two separate parts to join back on, whereas here you can kind of just push them into shape and tape them together, and it works. You know, we're not, with this technique, you're not going for that fine detail, that precision. You're getting the implied form. So we're going to skip ahead here to me not trying to do the hand, and I'll show you the successful hand later on. But what I'm doing now is, because I know I want to join, like, let's say we did want to make a torso as well, and we are going to make a hand. I am trying to go as far up my shoulder as possible so that I hopefully end up with, you know, quite a bit of shoulder that kind of extends a little bit onto the torso. And that's going to give me a nice amount of my material, cellophane and tape, to then later on attach to a torso. And the same with the hand. Like I go sort of over the wrist, over the back of the hand, like a really oversized long sleeve kind of thing. Now I've done about 3 to 4 layers of cellophane on each, you know, section of my arm. And what I'm starting to do now is to hold the shape with tape. Now, so I'm trying to hold my arm exactly where it needs to be. I'm bending it a little bit more than I had been. It ended up sort of straightening out a little bit. And so I'm securing this elbow joint with quite a bit of tape. And you can see there what I just did was I had put a bit of tape down, and it had stretched too far across the inside of my elbow and made a sort of web shape, and I was really losing too much detail there. So I just gave that a little snip with some scissors very carefully, very gently, just so I could avoid having like a webbed elbow. Unless that's a look you want to go for. I didn't in this case. So I'm slowly wrapping. I'm using quite large pieces of tape because I'm hoping that I can go around the general area of my arm, really create this exoskeleton, lock in the cellophane, keep it holding its shape. And what I keep doing is I keep touching my arm, feeling where I can still feel bare cellophane, plastic wrap, and I just keep taping on. And if I tape a long strip, then I'll come back and I'll tape something, do some tape that goes in the other direction, that goes around my arm, and then I'll go along my arm, and then around my arm. Along your arms are quite nice for like really securing a lot of material in one go. but then you're going to want to wrap around your arm to sort of pull in that form a little bit, to tuck in any of the loose bits of tape that are sort of poking out that might get snagged, but they're also sort of changing the form to not look like a smooth arm shape anymore. And I just keep on going. Like, I'm just feeling, how far do I want to go up my arm here? How much cellophane is exposed? Now here, what I've decided to do is to actually add a little bit more cellophane after the fact. I feel that there's an area that's not quite covered enough with cellophane, and I'm coming back in with more. And I think that's to extend my cuff and to strengthen the cuff of my arm so that I can better attach a hand later. So I'm just extending that. And I'm having a go at seeing if I can just pack me up like a little box straight from the roll there. Is that good technique or not? You decide. I think if I had have thought about this before, I probably would have done that to begin with. I would have just done a general taping up of the arm straight from the roll, spiraling around the entire arm as I went, and then sort of fine-tuned it later. It would have been much speedier, and if you have someone else with you, that'd be so much handier. Now here, what I'm showing you is a safety blade. It might be that you have one in your studio. I'd maybe recommend purchasing ones. What I can do to create my seam here, so I feel like I've got to the point where I've sealed everything in enough and it feels rigid enough that it's going to hold its own form. And I chose to do my cut to get my arm out on the underside of the arm. I'll talk about a little bit about the pros and cons of this in a minute. The reason I chose this was on the underside, I felt like it would be less exposed. And so when I tape it back up again, any kind of flaws or misalignments in the tape are going to be less obvious. Now, unfortunately, what happens is here, in that inner elbow, I really run into some problems. So, safety notes here. You're going to have to cut yourself out of these. Now, whether you're working by yourself or in a pair, I would recommend having a standard pair of sort of paper, sort of safety kids scissors around for this. These scissors are a little bit too sharp. And especially because while I was taping myself up, I was moving my arm a lot. This soft, delicate inside of my elbow skin has gotten all tangled up with the cellophane. And so I'm having real trouble here managing to cut this underside without snagging my skin and snipping myself. I keep trying with the safety blade, but it's got too long of a prong. I can't get around the corner. And I keep jabbing it into myself. And so I changed the direction of the cut a little bit to a flatter area that isn't this inside curve. But what I think I would recommend for you is, because when I tape it up afterwards, that seam goes really well, actually. And it's very forgiving. I was worried it would be obvious, but actually it's really not. If you do it gently and carefully, you can get that seam nice. And so what I would recommend is, especially if you've got a friend working with you, you cut the outside curves. So I would actually do the cut like right on the outside of my arm. And that way you're less likely to snag sort of delicate armpit skin and that kind of thing. You see, I'm sort of, that skin's a bit raw in there. So I'm just cutting it off here, and we are finally free. And again, what's nice about this stuff is you can bend it fully to pop it out and then reform it, squash it back into shape. Be really careful here, because you could like push it too far, knock it, sit on it, especially if you're working in a crowded classroom with other people. Make sure you keep this safe for now. Now what I'm doing is queuing up a few strips of tape to start suturing this wounded arm together. And first of all here, I am going to do a long way strip. and just secure that in, pressing those two seams up against each other nice and neat. Now again, because this type of cut and mold making is only really going to create a general impression, it's going to end up a little bit wonkier than it was, but I think for this that's okay, because it gives you a starting point. And I'm just going to keep taping this seam up. Now I think I only really ended up using one, just taping up that seam and not wrapping any more around. But it might be that you pull it off and you find that your arm's a bit wobbly, a bit shaky, liable to get squashed in certain areas. You could wrap more tape around the entire thing and reinforce it while it's off. I am either drinking from it there or blowing it like a Viking horn. I'm not sure which, you decide. So I'm going to carry on just taping it up here. But I think we are going to skip ahead now to the hand, and I'll talk through what I do for the hand. Just reinforcing this just a little bit more. Some areas that maybe had just cellophane, or here, that elbow joint. A little bit more tape, get that exoskeleton rigid as I can. Obviously I have plastic down on my table from another project where I was pouring resin, and I left the plastic on and all the tape sticks to the plastic. Lovely stuff. Okay. My general idea, you saw me have a little go at the hand in the previous project, and then decide it wasn't a good idea to try and do both the whole arm and the hand all at once. My idea here is I'm going to pull out a bunch of strips of the cellophane, and I will fold them, and I want to try to capture each finger and then the palm and sort of back of my hand, and then try and join them together. And then I want to make sure that I have covered, sort of down, sort of an inch or two down the wrist as well. Kind of like an entire glove, kind of gauntlet kind of shape to it, because then again, I have a lot of material that I can use to attach to the whole arm when that happens. I would say this is definitely where it gets really, really tricky to do it by yourself, and it would be worthwhile having another person. With the whole arm, it's quite nice and neat and easy. You just wrap big swaths of the cellophane around your arm. But here, with the delicate fingers, the detail there, we want to try and capture this. And as I say, this technique is not good for detail, and so we need to work a little bit harder. And what I'm trying to show you here is I'm actually picking little tiny bits of tape, much smaller than we've been using before. For the general shape of the arm, we could get away with doing big lengths of tape, but here I just want little slithers that I can quickly and easily, and without losing detail on the fingers, be able to wrap them in. Now I'm going to have a couple of goes here, but what you're going to struggle with is that the cellophane won't start to stick. It only sticks to itself, right? Think about that. So I need to get a nice and secure wrap going on before I can really pull the tension, capture that form. And because I'm trying to capture my hand in a sort of like claw shape as I showed you then, what's tricky is that it doesn't want to bend around those corners very well. It might be that you want to try cutting the cellophane into smaller sections. I feel like this went okay, and it's the kind of thing where you can edit later, and I'll show you a point where I do that. Now, I'm very handily sort of holding everything well outside the camera view here while I do it, so that's great. But I'm wrapping it around and then just tightening it and sort of twisting it off. Hopefully I'll bring my hand back down to the camera. You can see I'm going each finger in turn, with it progressively getting harder and harder to do as I go. What I'm tending to do is I'll wrap the finger while it's straight, and then just like with the arm, I'll bend it round and then secure it later. Now it is nigh impossible to fold the cellophane. You can see I'm folding it in half so that the width that I'm wrapping around the finger is roughly the length of the finger itself. I don't have a huge amount hanging off the end. You could do it that way, and especially if you're working with a partner, they could either cut those pieces in half again, or wrap a whole piece around your finger and sort of snip the end, being very, very careful of the model's finger's skin. We're not trying to trim anyone's nails here. And then I'm just pushing it down against the table to try and get any purchase. Wrapping it around, and then once the cellophane is caught on itself, you can get that tension. Okay, now here what I'm gonna have to do is try to work on the palm and the back of my hand, and I'm just puzzling out how to do that. And unfortunately what's going to happen is it's going to look very messy at first, and then over time I'll start tidying it up. Now what I've gone for here is, as opposed to just trying to wrap it straight around, I'm trying to use the shape of my hand to my advantage. And I'm using the space between my fingers and my thumb to be able to pull tension, and wrapping the cellophane in a crisscross fashion. And as we go forwards, you can see, yeah, great, I'm getting the back of my hand and my palm, but there's this big gap where my knuckles are. As we go forwards, I start to do the same thing between my knuckles. Now I would have, if you're working in a team, I would continue to work delicately. I maybe lost my rag a little bit here and just went for a huge, massive, like full pieces of the cellophane. And what I'm going to show you here is that even if I secure, I'm going between the thumb and the fingers, even if I end up creating webbing here between my fingers, I come back in with my scissors and snip between the fingers very gently, very carefully to avoid skin, and I end up folding that back on itself. But it helps me get that initial hand shape. And now I'm just taping to secure the fingers and the palm. I think I am taping between the palm and the fingers to join them both together. And now we really watch the pain as I try to get the cellophane from the roll. Now I'm trying to go with whole pieces between the fingers, really bridging that gap between the palm and the fingers, coming around, pulling back up, going between a different finger. What a mess. I've still got gaps there. Let's hope I manage to fill them. Same again. Securing a piece of cellophane lower down on my arm, and then changing the direction, pulling it up between a finger. So the cellophane has tension that I can work with, and then I can pull that tension. Wrapping it around again, pulling it up, bringing it between a finger. Back down over my palm, wrap it around my wrist, pull it up again, between another finger. And this is how I'm doing that very strange sort of part that was not joined together in the previous section there. Okay, we're getting there. Still looks a little thin between the fingers and the main hand itself, but I'm calling it there. Now I'm going to sort of secure the form with tape. And now I've ran out of all the bits of tape I pre-prepared. So we will watch this absolutely painful scenario. Oh gosh, I'm just going straight for it. Just tape straight on there, right over the whole finger. Lock it in into its curled final position. A bold move, I do say so myself. This is an absolute nightmare. Cellophane sticking to the tape. Tape going everywhere. Just going for it there. And the dispenser has come off of the tape itself. Everything's going wrong. We're just dispensing with the dispenser. And we're just going to wrap it right around this wrist. Now this wrist is going to be great. I would give yourselves this much on any join. 3 to 4 inches. Of overlap to join back onto your arm, or if it was at the top of the arm, onto the torso, because that's going to really stop that joint becoming a weak spot, because you can give it a lot of tape and it'll have a lot of structural support. Now I am just going crazy here, wrapping all my fingers. Again, would thoroughly recommend doing this with someone else. I'm going to get my form. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with the scissors. I'm going to trim off the tape that's causing my fingers to be bound up together. This looks messy, but over this next little bit, you'll watch me sort of tidy the form of the hand up, separate the fingers back out. Or not. I'm just going straight for cutting this off. I'm going underneath the wrist and then cutting up the palm. Now I decide to try and, hopefully you've not wrapped it too tight, and I decide to try and wiggle each finger off. Just pull the wrist and the palm down a little bit. Just tease these fingers off, just like a glove. Okay, there, we'll just keep working it. And it's off. Very rudimentary hand tape piece. So here, again, just like with the arm. So with the cut on the hand still open, what I'm doing here is I'm bringing it up to the arm's wrist stump, securing it on, and then again, just like the glove I just took it off, I am putting it back on my surrogate arm. And this means I can tape the sort of collar of the hand around that wrist and lock in the shape of the hand exactly how I want it. Bring these two seams together, We end up pinching on the wrist a little bit, but I fill in that space that is created by the curvature of that, so that's okay. Now I've gone for more of a spiral kind of angle here, just to get a good amount of coverage of tape. And we have it nice and secure. And then we just push it right up to the camera. Out of focus. Lovely stuff. Okay, after I have marvelled at my work and how easy that was to make the general impression and shape of an arm, what I'm doing here is I'm going back in. Do you remember when I got real wild and crazy and just started taping up my fingers? I'm going back in and I'm trimming the tape. You know, I pulled my fingers out. I can now go be a bit more, work a bit more into them. So I'm basically cutting this one off, this middle finger. Really, you can see it wobbles around. It's not very attached to the main structure of the hand, and so I'm just sort of cutting its webbing off, and then cutting smaller bits of tape so I can tape it right back on to the hand itself. And this is where you can also edit that shape of your hand. You can move these fingers around, retape them in different positions. You've got material to work with. And that's what these 3 demos have been about, is giving you that framework, that structure, where you've then got something to really dig into, mess around with, but quite quickly, simply, easily. 3 different techniques with 3 different ways of working. As I finish this up here, I can see that my fingers look a little bit stubby. I've got a little bit too much tape sort of around the base of my fingers from the way I was doing it, but I don't mind it because I have an idea of how I'm going to coat this one, and I think the way I want to coat this one, it looks quite plasticky and strange right now, because it is very plasticky. But I think I want to carry on that vibe, and I want to drizzle plastic resin all over it and sort of make it look even more gloopy.